and welcome to another one of our interview series. Today, I'm so pleased to have with us Bill Eddy, who is a lawyer, social worker, mediator, author, and the founder of the High Conflict Institute. Welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Glad to be on with you.
Bill has developed methods for helping both divorce professionals who work with high conflict families, as well as high conflict families themselves, to help them to better understand what's happening and to help them to reduce their conflict. Bill is here with us today to talk about his famous BIFF method of communication, a proven method used by divorce professionals worldwide to help families to de-escalate their communication and to effectively communicate into homes. Okay, so let's get started. So you work with high conflict regularly. What do you experience to be the most problematic with these families' communication?
It really seems to me to be blame. And blame is where you make the other person responsible and you don't take responsibility yourself. And that really kind of stymies any chance of problem solving. So the whole dialogue or conversation just shifts into one of blame and counter blame and not problem solving. So I'd say blame is really the number one barrier to positive communication.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I'm excited for us to talk about, your BIFF method of communication, because that's precisely what it's about, is to try to get out of that blame game and to try to learn tools on how to effectively communicate your message. So let's talk about it. You've created that formula to help families how to effectively communicate when their conflict is escalated. You call it BIFF, and let's talk a little bit more about it.
Well, BIFF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So brief means that you really don't need to have more than 3-4 sentences, maybe a paragraph. And it's designed generally for email and text, so that those are supposed to be brief formats, but people find ways to go on for pages. But even if you get an email that's going on for pages about how rotten you are, or you should have done this, a paragraph is usually sufficient. So it's brief. And that way there's less to stir up the other person or to escalate. The second thing is informative, that it's just straight information. It's not defenses, arguments, emotions, opinions. It's just straight information. So that really keeps it confined to problem solving instead of swinging into, well, no, I didn't, yes, you did, kind of back and forth. So straight information. Then first F is for friendly. And you're going to go, well, why should I be friendly? The person's, treating me like dirt. Well, you can influence other people by how you respond. And so if you respond in a friendly, and it can just be briefly friendly, like, thanks for letting me know your concerns, or thanks for responding to my request, those types of things, just put a friendly tone on it, often take the hostility out, because it's hard to have a hostile conversation if one person just stays unengaged and friendly. Now, it doesn't mean that you're withdrawn, but it means that you're just focused on problem solving. And then the last F is for firm, meaning that you end the hostile conversation. Doesn't mean harsh. So it's just, you don't put any hooks out there to grab the person like, what do you think of that, buddy? You don't want to do that. You want to just say, and that's what I have to say on that subject. Have a good weekend, or something if it's the end of the week. Something that keeps it in that friendly tone, informative, brief, and firm. So that means end the hostilities. Now, I want to mention with that, sometimes you need information. And so you may say, please let me know yes or no by Thursday at 5, so that it's clear, it's simple, ideally yes or no. And that is also a BIFF response.
Yeah. So you're either ending the conversation by just providing the information that you need in the format that you describe, or you're specifically asking to carry on the conversation, but in a very limited way. So, as you said, please answer me on this particular thing by a certain date. And so that's firm, and that it gives that deadline, and is more likely that the person will respond.
Yes, absolutely. Because if you don't say, if you say, please let me know, and 2 weeks later, you didn't let me know, I said, well, I was going to.
Yeah. And, I find it interesting when you talk about being able to influence others, because so often what will happen is it's not just one side who's high conflict, it's the toxicity between two parents that can cause that high conflict. And so when you're met with the high conflict communication by responding in that BIFF way, brief, informative, friendly, and firm, what we're hoping to do is to end that response, to sort of change the tone of the, to try. So the person's looking for the nugget. What is this person asking me? Even though they're describing it to me in a high conflict way, what is their point? So that when I respond, because I can only control myself, when I respond, how do I respond in a way that doesn't cause it to be further escalated? And so that firm at the end is really the helpful one to hopefully end that. And then you get back the same high conflict response again, and you try it again, and you try it again. And I would think that that's what can really cause long-term change, is when you just continue to stay at it with the BIFF communication, and the other person, we expect, will learn.
Well, let me reinforce that, because we're getting feedback now, like from lawyers in high conflict divorce cases, saying, you know what, Bill, my client's been writing BIFF responses for the last 6 months, and guess what? The other person is now starting to write back in the same format, and they don't even know what it is, but they know that the way my client's writing sure looks better if it's ever going to end up in court. And so you're absolutely right that you can influence the other person. It may not be right away, but over time. And if the other person starts responding with BIFF responses, boy, it just makes things so much easier for the whole family. And the tension for the kids is often eased, because the parents are now being more respectful with each other.
And it is hard to fight with yourself. And so if one person continues with the high conflict messages and the recipient responds with BIFF communication, over time, the person that sends the high conflict messages is not getting that feedback, is not getting that reinforcement to continue the high conflict messaging. And so they eventually, and as you described, they just eventually stop, because they're not getting what it's the sort of that reinforcement of high conflict, the escalating messages.
That's what it takes to keep it going. So if it's like, think of it as a tug of war, and you're pulling on the rope, and you let go of the rope. And the other person falls in their own mud, or they let go of the rope and keep standing, but the war's over. And I like to say that BIFF responses are like pouring cold water on the flames, and you just douse it. And often some of the best BIFF responses, there's just no comeback to it, and no response. And
or it could reignite, but then you pour water on it again, and you hope that there's less chance that it reignites over time. Let's carry on with one more acronym that you described, which is the 3 A's.
Yeah, so the 3 A's. So really, this is part of, if you've written something and you're now trying to decide, should I send this? That you ask yourself, is it brief, informative, friendly, and firm? And then ask yourself the 3 A's. Does it contain any advice? And it's tempting to give advice. Let me give you some advice, buddy.
No.
And that's not gonna calm things. That's gonna escalate things. Also, another A is admonishments. Admonishing is talking down. You should never have done that. You know better, or maybe you don't know better. That kind of language. It's like talking a parent to a child or a judge to a person in court. As admonishments don't do well. They undermine BIFF responses. The third A is the one that catches people by surprise and is counterintuitive, and that is avoid apologies in BIFF responses. And people will go, well, wait a minute, aren't apologies a good thing? Yes, they are in general, but if you're responding to an angry person, what we have seen is that angry person will save your apology, like you apologize for like 1% of the problem. And what they heard is it's all your fault, and you agree it's all your fault. I remember one day I was doing a mediation, and there was a couple, and one pulled out this very worn piece of paper and said, don't you remember when you admitted that it's your fault, that you didn't do this well and you didn't do that well? And it was like they were using that as a hammer. The person was trying to calm them by apologizing, really over apologizing. So we recommend against apologies. They often get misinterpreted as much bigger than they were intended, and they get used as ammunition against you. So it's tricky. We're starting to call it apology quicksand, because when you're dealing with an angry person or a high conflict person, it's going to get distorted and used against you. So just steer clear of that. Maybe there's a time and place for an apology, but not usually in a BIFF response.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. And I forgot to mention right at the beginning of our interview today is Bill has written numerous books. I had mentioned that you've authored. You're an author and of lots of books for both families and for divorce professionals. And one of them that I want to point out here is this is a really handy reference. And this is one of your newer books called BIFF for CoParent Communication, and lots of really handy tips. And so it will go over this BIFF communication, and it gives lots of good examples of what BIFF communication looks like. And it takes some example texts and says, maybe this one is brief, informative, it's not so friendly. Here's how to change around that, make it a little bit more firm or not too firm, or that sort of thing. So it's really good with lots of good examples, and it's also got the 3 A's in there. So and it's a really easy read. So I recommend that our viewers take a look at this book. I recommend it to all of my clients to help them to do some learning outside of my office as to how to reinforce some of that learning. So I use Bill's BIFF communication tools in my entire practice. And so this can really reinforce things for our viewers and for my clients outside of my office. So
yeah, let me mention there's 28 examples in there, and like you said, there's a hostile or misinformed statement, then there's like one attempt, but it's usually not really a BIFF response. So you can analyze it, and then there's a BIFF response. So you've got 28 examples, all kinds of medical, schedule change, school information, lessons, reimbursements. Just we tried to cover all the types of categories, so people have some sample language they can use, or just see how it works and then use their own language.
And that's what I found was so helpful about it, because there's a theory of what is a BIFF communication, and then there's the reinforcement of how to actually use it in real life. So do you want to give us one of the examples of a BIFF communication? Did you pick one out that was one of your favorites?
I can do that. especially because I also have a copy of it.
And there's also going to be a link to the book for Amazon to purchase the book if you are interested, right below the interview.
Yeah. So here's an example I like, and these are either like the exact example with names changed or close to. So these are all based in real cases. And I remember when I got this one. So we call this Carlos and Maria. So Carlos' dad writes an email to Maria, mom, says, when I got Junior today, he had an ear infection and needed to be taken to the doctor. The doctor said it was obvious that he got sick at your house over the weekend, and all caps, you did nothing about it, exclamation. He prescribed antibiotics, which you will need to make sure he takes twice a day in his ear. I'm sending the bottle with him to school tomorrow, so make sure he has it in his backpack when you pick him up. Once again, you have been, all caps, irresponsible about Junior's health care, and I have to clean up after your irresponsibility. I will discuss this with my lawyer and decide whether to return to court to reduce your parenting time for the health and safety of our son. So that's a little bit hostile.
Wow. I think we could pick that one apart.
Yeah. So we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on how should you respond to that. So this was someone that contacts me, Bill, look at what I got. What should I do? So I said, well, draft something and we'll talk about it. So what do you think of this? So her draft response. Thank you for taking Junior to the doctor. Ooh, now that's friendly. That's a nice introduction. I will follow the directions for his medication. I was not irresponsible with Junior, and he had no signs of an ear infection while with me. As you may know, those symptoms can come on very quickly. I'm fairly sure the doctor did not tell you that he obviously got this ear infection while with me. I will keep you advised of Junior's condition while he was with me. So let's take a look at that. First of all, was that brief? Yeah. Just what was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sentences. That's fairly brief. Now, was that informative? Yes, she's going to take care of, make sure he gets this medicine. But was there anything that wasn't really like emotions, opinions, defenses? Yeah, she's saying, I was not irresponsible. And I'm sure the doctor did not tell you he obviously got his ear infection while with me. I mean, I agree with her, but that's not going to help. Friendly? Nah. pretty angry. Firm? Maybe, but it's the kind of response that triggers a counter response. So it's probably going to keep it going. Now, what about advice? No advice. Admonishments? Well, maybe, because she's admonishing him. You know, I'm fairly sure the doctor did not tell you he's obviously got this ear infection while with me. Feels like an admonishment. Apologies? No, didn't hear that in there. So let's see if she can make one that's really a BIFF response. Carlos, thank you for taking Junior to the doctor. I will follow the directions for his medication. Junior had no signs of an ear infection while with me. As you may know, these symptoms can come on very quickly. I will keep you advised of Junior's condition while he is with me. So which one feels better? The first one where she's pointing out the doctor didn't say that probably, and the second where she just skips that. Mm-hmm. To me, it's the second one, and most people would agree with that. Now, you might want to write the first one. Maybe you could write it but not send it, and then send the second one. So that's what she did.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I mean, sometimes things are more time sensitive that you have to respond within a certain amount of time, but to be able to craft a response and think about it and reread it. And as you said, look at all of the elements of it, of the type of things that it should contain, it shouldn't contain, the qualities of it. Just slowing down that communication can help a lot with the response, because you can get heated when someone's blaming you, as in this example, for this ear infection. It's hard when you're a parent in that situation. You're being blamed for your child getting an ear infection. So as you said, starting out by writing the first version and then thinking it over and starting to take out some of those elements that are more blaming, and the passage of time can probably help a lot too.
Yeah. Let me mention here, in this book, I had two co-authors. So Annette Burns and Kevin Chafin. And Kevin taught me something I hadn't thought of before, and that is take the incoming hostile email and rewrite that as a BIFF, and then do your response to that, because you're not going to be angry at the BIFF that you've now rewritten from then. And it just has the essence. It's like, here's the medication, make sure he gets it. And it's like, thank you, and I'll make sure he gets it.
Very simple.
And I just thought that was amazing. Well, he's a therapist. He's been teaching BIFF to his clients for about 10 years. I developed the method 14 years ago. And so he's been doing it for about 10 years or so. Annette Burns is a lawyer who's also been using this for about 10 years. And it's really not that hard, but it does take practice. And you practice it and get better and better. I'll tell you a funny thing. I once, as a lawyer, had a letter I needed to send to the lawyer on the other side. And I would always run them by my client and say, is there anything you want to add to this or anything it needs? And one time this client said, well, Bill, there's a sentence in there that you would tell me to take out if I had written it. And I looked back and said, oh my goodness, he's right. I must have been a little too irritated when I wrote that letter. And so I took that out, and of course it was much better. So it's kind of fun when clients start pointing out, even to their lawyer, that, well, maybe there's a sentence there you might want to reconsider.
Yeah, that brings up a very interesting point about, the back and forth of family law can often be escalated by the words of the professionals, and through letter writing and through affidavit material and other things, and phone calls. And it takes that certain skill set to apply the, avoiding the mudslinging. For the sake of mudslinging, you may have to point out things that are more difficult to point out or that can tend to escalate. But when it's simply for the fact of mudslinging, that's where it escalates the professionals, which also escalates the parents or the parties. And so a BIFF communication can be helpful for any professional or personal situation. Absolutely.
Yeah, I find myself writing them to other professionals, et cetera, even more than ever before, or strangers that may say, oh, I saw something on your website, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, whoa, they're attacking me for something on my website that no one else ever complained about before. Well, I'll send them a BIFF response, and then that usually takes care of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just a bit of a light bulb moment there, as far as the applicability to professional letter writing, and it can really go a long way in either escalating or de-escalating in the results of the communication.
Yeah, and people can use them anywhere in their life. So we're teaching this a lot in the workplace now. Parents who going through high conflict divorce say, well, yeah, I'm using this at work because my boss is kind of difficult at times. And I want to give them a piece of my mind. And I think it's better if I respond with a BIFF.
Well, this book series, you've got a number of them. One is for workplaces, I think.
Yes,
You got
and
two
that
or
just
three,
came
I
out.
think.
Yes, there's three. So
Hmm.
there's the first original one, BIFF, Quick Responses to High Conflict People. Then there's the one that we're talking about now, BIFF for Co-Parent Communication.
Hmm.
And the third one just came out recently. It's BIFF at Work. And it's for communicating inside the organization as well as with customers and people outside the organization.
Yeah.
So I guess the point I want to emphasize with all of this is high conflict behavior and high conflict people can appear anywhere. And it has nothing to do with occupation or geography or intelligence or income. It's just across the board. And especially nowadays, there's so much reinforcement of high conflict language that people really have to learn their own skills for screening it out and checking themselves, which is what the BIFF method helps people do.
Hmm. I'd love to hear a little bit more about in here you talk in the book, you talk about social media and some specific suggestions that you can give now. I mean, social media, again, with the emotionality involved in the quick responses, can really escalate quickly. So I'd love to hear a few suggestions, if you have them, for parents when they're trying to write or respond to social media posts in a BIFF way.
Well, the general principle is the same, and you want to be
Mhm.
brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Avoid advice, admonishments, and apologies. The difficulty with social media is it can pick up speed so quickly, and there's more people involved, and so you may feel more embarrassed. It's like your ex is publicly saying things that really aren't publicly appropriate, but now what do? And so you're tempted to have an angry response, how dare you, blah, 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 blah. But what I generally recommend is if something's being said in public about your divorce or separation or parenting issues, is to do a BIFF response that basically tells the public of the social media, so and so has shared some private information or discussing a private matter between us. You don't need to get involved. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and have a nice day or something. But the idea is, by not responding at all, it may
Yes.
look like what's being said is true. That may not be true. But if you respond and you go, well, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true, you're escalating, and now you're going to get another response. But if you just put a lid on it and say, look, this is a private matter, you don't need to get involved, and contact me if you have any questions. What that does is it tells the other person you're not defensive, and it tells them that if they have concerns, you'll talk about it, but it's fine for them not to get involved. And let me tell you, people don't want to get involved in other people's high conflict divorces. So it's very unlikely they would respond, but they might think what's being said about you is true. And that's a good response. That's a good BIFF response. That's like 3 sentences that just pours the cold water on the flames of the hostile message to the public. And high conflict people often try to involve a lot of people. I was consulting recently with someone who thinks that their ex copied about 100 people on an email saying how rotten she was. And it's like, we wanted her to respond to them, but she didn't know who they were. So she responded to people she suspected or knew got it, to try to get the word out, and maybe it spread to other people. But I think, yeah, the power of social media to emotionally really harass people is so strong. But part of what we're learning is we all need skills to put up a buffer between what other people do and how we feel. And you can. Our brains are built that way. You can, hear something that's rotten and reinterpret it, or just not do that emotional response yourself, and you can feel better. And that's BIFFs really help people respond to hostility while feeling good about themselves.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things you said was it would be in part of your intuition to not respond, and to say, I'm not going to respond because I'm not going to engage, and that will hopefully put the cold water or the lid on the flames. But as you describe, you also, by not responding, there can be some assumptions that are made that, really you do need to actively put that lid on it, as opposed to just thinking that the passage of time will cause that issue to go away.
Yes, and you used a good word like actively or passively, and I like to talk about the assertive approach. BIFF is an assertive approach. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to harm or destroy the other person, but you're now not allowing yourself to be harmed or walked on. Mm-hmm. The aggressive approach tries to hurt the other person. The passive approach allows yourself to be hurt. The assertive approach protects yourself, but isn't designed to injure the other person, and outsiders really respect that.
Mm-hmm. I'd be interested, Bill, to hear a little bit about your story of how you developed the BIFF method.
Yeah, this is an interesting story, and it's in the very front of the book.
Yeah.
And the first book, we didn't talk about where it came from, but I felt like for co-parents, want to talk about where it came from, because it was developed in giving a seminar about managing high conflict divorces. Mm-hmm. So in March of 2007, I was giving one of our first High Conflict Institute seminars with my co-founder, Megan Hunter. And she worked with the court system in Arizona, and I was a family lawyer and therapist in San Diego. And so we got together and co-founded High Conflict Institute. So there was about 20 people at this seminar, and I'm giving the seminar for 2 or 3 days, really covering a lot of material. And so there were some psychologists there, some lawyers there, and there were 2 family court judges there. And in the middle of the seminar, one of the judges says, has a question. Say, go ahead. They say, what can we do about these horrible emails that we see going back and forth? And she said, people file these for us to read in our court cases, and each person that sends them to us thinks they look good and the other person looks bad, but they both look bad. And I said, what can we do about that? So I'd been at that point, about 15 years, I've been a family lawyer. And so I said, well, here's what I've learned, because I've coached my clients, and I had been a therapist before I was a family lawyer. And so I said, well, first of all, they got to be brief. These long things, they just have so much to trigger. And so I basically talked about what I've been doing with my clients. So I said, I keep them brief, like a paragraph. And I said, and they should be just straight information. That keeps it from escalating, none of the other emotional stuff. And I said, it really should have a friendly tone. And that's hard for my clients to accept, but they've learned that you need a friendly tone so you're not fueling the fire. So I said, brief, informative, and friendly would be good. And the judge or the other judge there sitting together said, oh, well, that's BIFF, B-I-F. And I said, oh, I hadn't really thought about the letters, but you're right. And they said, well, if you add another F, you'll have BIFF, like the name. And so I said, well, the other F would probably be firm, because you want to end it. You want to stop the hostility. So I'd say firm, so BIFF. And thus BIFF was born. And it was one of the things that people talked about, like they gave us feedback after a seminar and they said, so what was helpful? And we put BIFF, BIFF, BIFF. And we realized we had something there, that it was simple and really useful and practical. Now, I don't know if you want me to tell you about the next part, how we decided to call it BIFF Response.
Sure.
Okay, so here's
Let's
where
go for it.
Here's where it gets funny. So I was giving a seminar actually I think it was in Toronto, maybe 6 months after that. And I taught them BIFF. And afterwards, this one counselor, I think, came up to me and he says, I'm from Australia. And in Australia, a BIFF means a fat. And I was like, I wasn't sure what the word was. It was a fat, and I didn't know that accent. And I knew in about 6 months I was going to be going to Australia to teach for the first time. And so I didn't want to embarrass myself and embarrass him that I didn't understand him. So I thought, well, I'll look this up. And so anyway, then I forgot about it. And I'm riding the bus from the airport in Melbourne, Australia, going to the hotel, and I'm going to go to the seminar. And someone's reading a paper, and in the paper it says, fans want more BIFF at games. And I figured, oh, okay, so BIFF is a fight. Because what I thought I heard him say was that it was a fart. And if it was a fart in Australia, I didn't want to teach the method. I was so relieved. So BIFF is a fight. It's like when the players start fighting with each other, which I'm sure people in Canada know well. I've been to ice hockey.
Yes.
I know how Canadians can play ice hockey. So I was pleased to know that, but then I was thinking, but this is a BIFF response, because this isn't a fight, this is a fight response. So we started calling it BIFF Response in Australia. And ever since, we've talked about it as the BIFF Response method. And we trademarked it in the United States and Australia. So it's been, and it's just, we figure we've taught 500,000 people with our books and seminars. And most people that learn this tell us that they teach at least one other person. So I think we've taught about 1 million people the BIFF Response method.
Mm-hmm. And in the divorce community, as divorce professionals, I mean, we talk about this method all the time. And I put it in my mediations. I talk to the families, and we put it into the separation agreement as far as, these are the qualities of your communication as part of your communication plan. It's so important. And I loved that story. That's why I asked the question, because when I read this book, I saw it in the preface and I thought, oh, we've got to get that into the interview, because it was such a great story as to how it came to be. It was obviously built sort of from the ground up without thinking about it. It sort of just came to be as you were in your seminar. That's what I love about it.
Yeah. And it's been so practical and simple.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've come to learn, is the best methods are simple methods, because you can think of them under pressure, and that really helps. And one thing, let me add, is while we call it a BIFF response, we've also learned you can start a conversation using a BIFF. So that's why the book says BIFF for CoParent communication. So you're writing a letter to your boss or your email to your ex, etc., is start it using brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And so it works.
Yeah. I love it. So my favorite part of every interview is my top 3 tips part. And so I'd love to hear it from you, Bill. You've given us so many tips for our viewers today as far as helping to reduce their conflict as they send and receive correspondences with their co-parent. So what would be your top 3 tips to help families to reduce their conflict in their communication?
Yeah. Well, the first one, of course, would be BIFF for communication. Whether it's and even though we talk about writing, people can do this in person too. You can be brief, informative, friendly, and firm. My second one would be, because these situations can become so emotional and upsetting, is one of the things that we like to teach is to give yourself encouraging statements. And to just regularly do that. Some people stick them to their mirror in their bathroom to just remind yourself, I can get through this. I've gotten through other things before. It's all about the kids, you know. I don't have to respond defensively. Whatever encouraging statement you can give yourself. People just don't realize they can really change their mood by what they tell themselves. So give yourself an encouraging statement, especially before you have a meeting that might be difficult, like with your ex, or a discussion with the kids that's tricky. Is give yourself an encouraging statement. I can get through this. I've done it before.
And those post-it notes on the mirror, on the monitor of your computer, great ideas.
Yeah, and I've done that. So
So have I. That's why I love it.
Works.
I've done that. Yeah, I do that.
Yeah. And the third is one of our other methods, and that's making proposals. And we actually have a little book about making proposals. But what we teach is don't focus on the past, focus on what to do now. And so you can make a proposal in a BIFF communication, you can make one verbally. But when there's a problem, don't look backwards, look forward and make a proposal. Here's what I suggest, or here's an idea, or here's what I propose. And we find that it just unplugs a lot of anger and resentment, because proposals focus on the future and the past can't be resolved. So the past is just there. And people spend a lot of time arguing about the past, but they never resolve the past because it's over. So focus on the future, make a proposal, and encourage the other person to ask questions about it so you can clarify anything, and then respond with yes, no, or I'll think about it. So 2 people can do that. Make a proposal, ask questions, and then yes, no, I'll think about it. And that's another simple method. That's the 60-second version of that one.
Yes. And Bill, you and I had talked about what kind of things did we want to talk about in our interview today. And we picked the BIFF method of communication. And of course, the making proposals is definitely another topic that we could expand on for more than a few seconds just at the end of our interview. And so that might be a little bit of a foreshadowing of another interview that we can do that focuses on how to make effective proposals to get out of the cycle of the escalating conflict and to get down to what really you need to do, which is to figure out the solution to your particular problem.
Yep. Well, that's a good proposal. I'll consider that. I'll think about that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a yes.
Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and helping our viewers to learn more about how to have effective communication in 2 homes when they're trying to raise children, and they have to maintain that communication and keep that conflict de-escalated for the sake of the children. I really want to thank you for joining us. It really helps because at Up a Notch Learning, what our goal is for families is to help them learn skills and gain the tools to build resilience as they raise their children in 2 homes. And there are specific things that they can learn learn. And so that's what we do here at Up a Notch Learning, is to help families to learn from professionals all over the world. So we thank you so much for joining us and adding to our interview series.
My pleasure, and good luck with your good work.
Thank you so much, Bill.